Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to look at how you can build a virtual green room as a series of inputs inside of vMix using a bit of scripting to help it along. So before we get into that, as always, I welcome everyone. If you have any questions, if you have anything you'd like to share, just post it in the comments. Also, if you'd like to join us here on the show, we can have somebody get you on air pretty quickly, so just join the link here. And I believe that link is also in the show notes, so we should be good. So let me see. I'm going to do a quick jump over. Rudy Engels has joined us here and left a comment. He's wishing everybody a good evening. So Rudy, thank you as always for joining us here. So one of the things that I actually was talking with a client, and they were saying how they wanted a way where when we had guests appear inside of a virtual green room, that when those guests went on air, they would disappear from the green room completely, not just the audio, but the whole process of them being part of that green room. And that got us thinking, maybe we should talk a bit more about the green room concept and virtual green rooms and some of the things that you can be doing with them. And so that's what we're going to be doing in today's show. So we built this using vMix. We're using live-to-air as our source, but there are lots of different inputs you can use for this to build a green room. And what we want to do is really break this down as a series of steps that we did to pull all this together and then dive into the scripting under it all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to our vMix screen here. And let me go into the actual section where I have all the green room inputs. So what you see here in the upper left corner where the mouse is moving is the composited green room that we put together. So it includes 9 remote guest inputs over here that are coming in. We have an inject for a producer, so if a producer wants to come in, they can just jump in and talk. We also have the program video and audio that will be coming back, so the guests that are off air can listen to what's going on air as well as talk with each other. So that's the basic framework for this green room that we have set up here. And we do it with a series of layers here. So the first one, and if you look down here, the first one is this input 9, which, if I select this, is really just a transparent background with the live-to-air inputs coming in to it. So right now, because there are no live guests, we actually are just using what we call an open seat icon, which is over here. And the way we did this is came in here and we just set this up as layers. So all of these layers right now point to the open seat icon. We will dynamically change this as we start to add guests, but this is how we initialize it. And these are just, from the standard way we're doing the zooming down to a smaller size. We're cropping the edges to get it all to fit. So everything we're doing here is just very standard vMix management for layers at this point. But the key here is that the input that we did this on was a color input. And in a color input, you can also select transparent, and that's what we did. And the reason we did that is because with 9 layers here, we didn't have a lot of room to do anything else. So we needed to do this across 2 inputs. So we created a second input, which is the actual green room input itself. And in this input, we actually now add the other elements that we needed, the producer, and right now they're offline. That's this box over here. We have the on-air video feed, which is this box here. Then we left the space in case we wanted to do something else in the background. We never did that, but this was just a sort of as a mechanism for us when we do this, it saves us a little bit of time if we just leave spaces, if we think we're going to do things. So that's what we did here. And then I take the input with the 9 guest slots and I lay that in. And because this input has a transparent background, you see everything behind it, which is really just a color green that we have. So the second input is a color input, but also instead of using transparent, it's using green. And that's how we have this set up for the layering. At the very top of this, we also have a title, basically, that has all the overlays. So all the things that you'll see with the color bars and the names, and that's all being handled by the title that we have here. And part of what we do when we manage the inputs in the green room is we put the data into the title. So if somebody is in the green room, they'll know who's on air with them, they'll know the names, all that stuff will be visible. So that's really the construction of this element of it. So it's multiple inputs, it's using layers stacked on layers to get this to happen. It's using a title designer overlay, and then it's just using images that we use based on the states of users. So before we go on, I just want to jump over. I think we have somebody else. So Chris has joined us. So he's first time joining live, but he's seen a few of our videos. So Chris, thank you for joining us here. Love to have new people, become part of the community here. So really appreciate you making the time. And we also have Peter from Berlin. Peter, thank you. So I appreciate you joining as always. It's great to have people participate in the show. So let's talk a little bit about how we adapt to production state, because there's a few things. So when you think about you have guests in a green room, you normally have, first you will have a sort of an open place. So you have a certain number of slots in your green room that you can assign to guests. So we call that sort of state there's nobody there, there's none there. So that's our open seat state, the open state. We then have where a guest is assigned to a channel. They're in one of these seats, but they're not actually connected yet. So that's another state. We have off air, which means that we're connected to those guests and they are, talking, but they're not live as part of our production yet. And then we have the on-air state. So we're really dealing with those 4 states when we are managing the green room here. And when a guest is first added, they sort of go to the assigned state, and then we automatically bring them on air. So they switch directly to the on-air state. So you'll see them show up inside one of these boxes over here. So let me, if I can show this over here, I'm just going to add one of the guests that I have over in live to air, and I'm just going to add them to this open seat here. So in live to air, I didn't start my script. So I just put them into channel 2 inside of live to air. And so now what you're seeing is a green background behind their name, which tells you they're off air. Green is outside of vMix world. Green means off air, red means program. So if I were to bring this guest on air, what we'll do is we move them from the green room. You'll get an indicator, but you still see their name because we want people to know that's who's there. They're just talking live now. So other people that could be in the green room would see that. And then when we switch off air, they will pop back. And this, again, what this means is that without doing anything directly in vMix, all these state changes are being handled through scripting. And because live to air publishes that, it's something that we can read in a script and then show on screen. And this works very cleanly. If I have multiples, I can add a second guest over here now. And so you saw that guest had the assign to, and then they jumped in. So that is exactly the staging you have. They got it put in the channel, and then they connected and went on air. So and went off air. So this now works the exact same way. I can bring everybody on or off air, and that will work. I can bring people individually on air, and the others will stay. So it becomes really flexible around all of this. So some of the things you'll notice here is that these color bars, these bars behind the name, those we are adjusting inside the title. So we're using one of the new features that became available in vMix 25 to let you manage the colors of elements inside a title. So we'll show you how we do that in a moment. So let me see. We have a few more people coming in. So we have Gary from Montreal. Gary, thank you for joining us. Good to see you here. And we have Kevin. He's coming in over Facebook. So good to see you here, Kevin. Thank you. I had noticed some of the activity you had on Streaming Alchemy, so I appreciate that. So I think now that we've gone through this, let's dig a bit into how this scripting works. And let me switch over to that. Okay, so the first place to start is, what is it that we're actually using to know these changes in state? And so that's just an XML file. So when Live to Air writes out, assigns guest or changes the state of guest, it writes that out as an XML file that can be shared through different systems. And that's what we're using here. Again, I don't want to make this too specific to Live to Air. What we're actually looking at is, you could, if you were using one vMix or OBS for a green room and another vMix as your actual production switcher, you could use scripting on both sides to write XML and read it. So you could do all these things pretty seamlessly, even with other systems. And there may be things you just use inside of vMix itself with dynamic variables, other things like that you could do to handle all of that. So if we come here, there's just a few things we're really focused on. So we know the channel number. So that's the one thing. What we're interested in is the guest state. The guest state is telling us that this is on air. So channel 1 is on air. Channel 2 is off air. It would also show us things like, if I scroll down a little, there's nobody assigned there. And there's also assigned, which would be the transitory state usually that you will see. So we are using that information there to pull out the correct state. And then we're using the name to put the names under everybody. So not a lot that we're taking out of this. There's a lot more information you could get, but this is giving us enough to populate that green room. And I think probably is a good time. Let's jump into the code here. So we're going to post all this code after the show, so you can jump into it. So the first thing to think about with the code is that we need this running in the background. So it's not something that you want to have to activate every time you take an action. So what we do here is, we define everything we're going to use. These are all just getting the variables all set, and they're all labeled here. But so we're sitting inside of a large while loop, and this will just keep looping in the background. And then at the end, we have a pause for, I think it's 300 milliseconds we put in, and then it goes in and does the check again. So this now sets this script up so it works every 300 milliseconds to go and check the state and update things that it sees. And as always, we start with opening up the vMix XML model and get all that in. And now what we're going to do is we're going to open up that XML file that Live to Air is writing. And we did this, I think, a couple of episodes ago where we did some scripting with XML. This will be very similar to that. We just define the directory, and we open the file up in file access for read, open it up. We then take and we load all the XML out of this file into this XML node list using the load command. And that's just one of the methods that are available to file streams. So we load in the data from the file stream into the XML node list. And then an important point is we close this file again. So we don't want to keep the file open too long. It's always a good idea, as my developers tell me, open a file, close a file. You don't want to leave files open and expect anything in the background to clean it up. That's just sort of good practice in doing these types of things. So what we've done at this point is we've opened this file with all the XML with the states, and we put that into a node list. And we've pulled out, that's what this thing right here does. It says, take that XML, get all the child nodes. And if you remember the way this was set up, LTA is the main node inside this XML. And then we just have, these are all the children of it. So guest-1, guest-2, that's all children of that node list. So in here, all I'm doing is taking all those and creating basically an array of XML nodes. And that's what we've done here. And now we really can start going through and pulling the information out. So in here, I'm just doing a big loop. That's this piece right here, which says start from 0 to the number of guest slots, because it's 0 relative. We do guest slots -1, but that's stuff we've talked about in the past. And so now this is going to loop through for the 9 channels and pull out the information about them. So we're getting the guest name, and we're just doing that through select node inner text for name. We are getting the guest state, so I have a right there so we can debug stuff. But so we're getting the guest state here as the inner text, and that's the on-air, off-air stuff that we were looking at. And then, very simple here, we're using a new function, for what we've talked about. We've never used this before. It's called a select case. And what we're doing is, based on the channel status, the guest status, we're taking different actions. So when we do this select case, we're doing it on LTA channel guest state. And so as we loop through each channel, we're saying if it's none, then what we're doing here is we are saying, okay, just put the, that this is open, and put the empty seat there. And we just put a fill color, which is sort of an off green, so people know it's, this is, a blue, so people know this is, not active. And then we are changing those things inside of the title. And so let me talk a little bit, because this is kind of a new function in here. So we've done set layer in the past. So set layer is taking the input that we have with the 9 guests in it in the transparent background, and is saying what image do I want to assign to that layer for each one of the guests. So since this is none, we're doing sort of the open seat layer, which, if you remember, was just sort of a blank gray seat sort of sitting there. And we are changing the colors inside. We're changing the text to just say it's open, and then we just open seat there. And then the set color function, which is one of the new ones that's in here, very, very similar. We come and say, what's the, the selected object name, which is, the background for the channel. And what do I want to do? I want to set it to a specific fill color, and that's this value over there. So the way you do that is just saying, I need to come in here and set it to, it was the, for the specific channel, this one, I want to set the fill dot color. So that's one of the constructs. I thought it was fill color for a long time, and I was running into all sorts of trouble. It's dot fill dot color, the same way you would use dot text or dot source for images or text. This is how you do it to change the color on an object. And so this is we'll use this all the way through. But the case statement now makes this really easy, because for none, we're just replicating this, but a few changes. So when it's assigned, we change the color, we change what it says there. So it's just saying that it's sort of, it's open, but it's, we're not doing anything to it. And then same for off air and same for on air. So in this case, we changed the background color to green, background color to red. We changed the image. So when we select the set layer for when we're off air, we actually are saying what's the live to air input for this, because we want to see the guest. But when they're on air, we set it to what was the input we used for the on-air, image, which was the sort of the white box with the on-air across the top. So gives you a great way to do different things for different states. And this is really expandable because with any of this, if I just had other states, I would just add them in here as another case and a set of functions I want to do. And you even have the case else at the end. And that says, if it wasn't any of these other things, then do this. So you can catch it too. So if there's nothing else, you can always make sure you've filled it in or done whatever you need to if it doesn't match any of the others. And that's it. So, I mean, even though when you look at what the script itself seems to be doing, where it's doing things all dynamically, it's a very simple loop in the back, read some XML, read the vMix state, and then just play with the assets here inside of a case statement. And as I said, we sleep then for 300 milliseconds. So, that's less than half a second. And then we loop. So the end while just bumps us back to the top, and we go and do the loop again after sleeping. So that's everything that we have in here around how we manage these elements. The other piece, though, that I wanted to touch on was some of the things that, so if I switch over to the vMix side again here, right now you can see I have this producer offline. And if you have a producer that's doing multiple things, you probably want, so they're not a distraction, to have this. But I don't know if we have a camera on this, but on the Stream Deck over here, I have a push to talk button. So what this would let the producer do is when you hold the button down, you can now see their video will come in here. And when I release it, it goes away. But I also in this have producer on and producer off. So I can just put it on and have it running and then just shut it off when I want it. So if I need to do a longer conversation as a producer, you can do that. And we are just doing that. Let me jump over to, let's see if we get this open. Okay. So we go over to the shortcuts we have here. And so I just have, I'm doing set layers here. So in this case, this is for the Stream Deck button up and down. So this is just going to say, I want you to take and put this value, this input into this layer inside the green room input. And so that's all we're doing here, very simple. But because the Stream Deck lets you know button push down and button push up, you can do this then as a push to talk. But we also then do it as a standard button that when, that's the next one over here, which is basically doing the same thing, except it's just when I have the button down for put it on or off, it locks it in that position. Very simple. So this is some of the simpler things that you can do inside a green room, but it makes it so much more accessible for people. And of course, we are also using another vMix 25 feature, which is the output, where it lets you know whatever your active output is, you can use that as an input. And it's specifically for things like this, where I want to put this in here and use that. So that's just another thing that you can add to pull all this together. But as you can see, even though they seem more complicated, green rooms are actually very, very simple constructs. Because we had 9 guests and a lot of other elements, we did it over 2 inputs. But realistically, if you're doing, say, 4 or 6 guests, you have plenty of inputs. You could do it, plenty of layers in that. You could do it all in one input. And for a lot of things, if you're doing it and it's managing the mix minus itself, like Live to Air does, you don't even have to do anything special with audio. You can just do that, straightforward video feeds into a green room and then pull them in and out when they go on and off air. So hopefully you found this interesting. Let's see, before we wrap up, I just want to see if we have any other comments. So we have Mike. Mike, thank you. So he says, great presentation. I'm glad you found this useful. I mean, I think it's something a lot of us are doing. And if you think about the guest experience, having them just sort of connect and be live and sitting in a studio and not having any sort of context around them can be difficult. And having that green room gives them that space, that virtual space, to adapt in the same way they would in the real world. I mean, if you've been to real world in-person events, panels will all get together right before they go on, and they all are talking with each other and sort of sorting out who's going to say what, or just getting to know each other and get a sense of the personalities that they'll be working with on that event. So this gives you that in a remote context, and I think that's really valuable. So let's see. So we say Samuel from Luxembourg. Samuel, thank you. I appreciate you joining us. And again, I'm always amazed that people spend their Friday nights with us, but incredibly grateful. So thank you. And we have Aziz. So Aziz is from Berlin. He said, could you also explain activators? Okay, a push button shows red while active. Okay, I can do that. A little more involved to do this here, but essentially, what an activator will do, it'll be something that is associated with an input, and so when things change with that input, so let me actually go here and see if I can get this set up. I mean, what will probably make sense is for me to do this, and this is definitely good, to do this as a separate show where I could dig into a bit more detail. So what you're basically going to do with activators is when you go to add one, you're going to say what's going to trigger this. And so this will be some type, it's a key press, it's something of some sort, a control change. So these are, you've got something that's going to make this happen. And from that, you're basically turning around and saying, what is this going to be against? What's the actual thing that's happening? So, an input goes or changes state or something. And then you're going to say what you want it to do. Do I want it to turn something on? Do I want it to turn something off? And for that, you need to pick the actual device, like a Stream Deck or something, where with that, you then can say, okay, now I know how the buttons are organized. I can say, turn this button. And you can do things like set it to specific colors. And that's basically all activators are. So right now, this is where if I set this off, let me just give you if I came here and set this up on a Stream Deck here, you now see I could change a specific button to a color. And, this is just how this would work. And it would still let you do things like put names on top of it and everything else. Like I said, it's a little too much to do in a sort of a quick overview without any sort of prep setup. But it basically is a fairly simple thing. And you're just assigning, based on one thing happening, you're assigning a color or some other attribute to another device. And it's really that simple. So you could do that, with Stream Decks. And that's a good topic, Aziz. We definitely should jump in to get that covered in a future show. Maybe we'll do it next week. So we'll see. That sounds good. So let's see. We have Battle for Freedom. So I am glad that you enjoyed the show last week with talking about PowerPoint and YOLO Live with the YOLO Box Pro. So that was a fun show to do. We got to play a bit more with hardware, which is always enjoyable. So let's see. So JP, thank you. I am grateful for you joining us again. So this is, again, I know I say the same thing all the time, but I am truly grateful every time somebody makes the time to be part of the show. So thank you, JP. So let's see, Aziz. No, thank you, Aziz. I appreciate the question, and it's another show topic that we'll definitely jump in and cover. And Battle for Freedom says, and he used vMix Social. That's great as well. So yeah, I mean, once you start working with these things across platforms, there's so many possibilities with all this stuff. And that's really where automation, all the other stuff that we talk about a lot on this channel with scripting and other things, that's where that comes in, where when I take actions on one system and something happens on another, sort of like when I move somebody on air and live to air and you get a change in the green room, those types of things are just really cool because you don't have to, you have somebody who's always paying attention, that little script in the background, and you can make sure those things can happen. So let's see. Since we have a lot of questions coming in here, why don't we wrap the main show and we'll jump into our post-show hangout and we'll dig into all of these questions. But hopefully, we'll get to see you all there. If not, we will see you next week with a new show. So see you in the post-show or see you next week. All right, welcome back. So we had a few more questions here, and I definitely want to sort of jump into this. So have you got so JP was asking, have you got a specific frame rate required for vMix for this input? So if you're talking about a remote guest, so everything that's coming into vMix these are coming in over NDI, but everything has to come in some broadcast standard size and frame rate. So these, even though we're getting things coming from a remote guest, that gets transformed sort of inside live to air or in vMix with vMix Caller. They're doing the exact same thing. You take whatever you have coming in at whatever frame rate you have it coming in at, and then you normalize it. So that's basically you start to put things into a buffer, and then you read from that buffer, and you read at sort of like 30 frames per second, 29.97 or 60, 59.94. That, so you're pulling it out the other side that, so you're guaranteed that on the extract from that buffer, that is a consistent frame rate coming in to the switcher application. On the other side, though, if you are talking to a remote guest using WebRTC, that can bounce all over the place, and you have to do that sort of normalization for the resolution. In terms of everything else, I mean, when guests come in, they can come in at pretty much any resolution, coming in through phones, coming in, through the, portrait versus landscape. So you just have to be able to handle that logically to populate whatever you're going to do as an input on vMix. But hopefully I answered your question there. So he says, so Aziz is asking, what else do you use scripting for in a show? So there can be tons of things for scripting. So you can use scripting to coordinate events. So if I were to put somebody on air, I could have a script in the background say, when the on-air guest changes, I'll get the correct lower third, put that up, put it on for 4 seconds or 5 seconds, then fade it off, then switch to a different shot. So you can do this for show openings. Things like if we wanted to do this here in vMix for our show opening, we would do it where we had the pre-show, then we'd hit a button and say, we start the show, it fades to our opening, fades to the, when the opening ends, we fade to the camera, I introduce myself, put the lower third up. So all that stuff can be done in scripting. And it's ideal for things that either have the same action occur to a specific type of input or specific type of event, or a sequence of events that's always consistent, and you just want to make sure they run on time and that every step gets done. So lots of things for scripting now. I mean, it's, everything that you can think about that you would want to automate, you can use scripting for. Anything that deals with data that you'd want to do indicators or overlays for, you can use scripting for that. And, we've done a lot of the shows here, so if you look up some of the things we've done in the past with, with vMix scripting, you can get a sense of the breadth of things. I mean, we've driven websites to go to Google Earth. So when somebody came in and we got their geotag, you could turn around and display where on the map they would be. Things like that, where it becomes, it becomes a creative tool at a certain point as well. And you start to think of it more as, how could I do something that nobody else has seen before? And that's the sorts of stuff. It's just open to your imagination. But the key piece here is that your imagination really becomes the limiting factor now, not the technology, because it basically lets you do anything you'd want to do during a production. So let's see, Kevin Michael Reed. So probably a post-show topic, but what are your thoughts on running LiveTear on AWS? That good point, because we have a lot of folks that have asked us about this. So the LiveTear does run in AWS. We actually have documentation on exactly how to set everything up, and it's pretty straightforward. You basically create a private virtual cloud in AWS, which has multiple boxes. So you could put vMix, you could put LiveTear, you could have other types of encoders like taking in SRT to bring in remote cameras, and you could switch an entire production all in the cloud. So it's not only possible, there are lots of people that are actually doing that. And it's what's great is that as long as you have an internet connection, that you can use something like, people think of it as TeamViewer, but it's Parsec, it's Teradici. These are all these remote desktop apps where you can connect to a remote system and operate it as if you were there. They don't need anywhere near the processing power or bandwidth that a regular production needs. So it gives you, even if you're in a internet challenged environment, it gives you the ability to do production control from that. And we think that's a huge advantage outside of the economics, which is a whole, probably, again, another good show at some point, but the economics of running things in the cloud versus running them locally. And that's something that, you'd have to figure out in terms of the aggregate business model and how often you're doing things, but definitely runs and can work with the distributed workforce. And again, this is another area where those types of things with scripting can really be valuable, because you don't have to do as much remotely. You can turn around and press a single button and have that fire off a set of actions across systems in AWS. So definitely a great question there. So thank you, Kevin. So, okay, so Aziz has a couple of questions here. He's asking, do you use scripting for audio levels? Let's start with that one. Scripting for audio levels is difficult. vMix doesn't open that up much. So you can do some things that are triggered against general audio levels like minus 10 dB, 0 dB. I forget the exact breakup in that. So you can use things like triggers for that. And that does, cover some of the things people may want to do with audio. You can control the audio levels if you want. So based on certain things, you could raise or lower the volume. You're just not getting a lot of information to make really smart decisions. So I don't know what the actual audio level is as a hard metric. I just sort of have these general ranges I can get through triggers. There's no way to display your own meters, because it's just displaying audio meters is a CPU taxing thing, and you can't really do it easily inbound in scripting. You could do it externally if you were doing things there, but again, you're not getting that information, so difficult to do some of those things. So it's sort of a mixed bag. You can do things, mute, unmute, set levels coming in, set levels going out, those types of things, but that's kind of where it's at, and you're not going to get that deep level of information that you may want for other things in audio. So let's see. So the Aziz's second question is, why not use shortcuts? So shortcuts are good for single things. So if I wanted to mute or unmute, that works really well. Scripting works if I want to do sequences of things or things with dependencies, where if somebody goes into the program, I want to go and do certain other actions. You could do some of that with scripting, where you can turn around and use a trigger to trigger a script. But the thing that script would, to trigger a shortcut, but that shortcut would do that one thing. So you would need to really start to, go into scripting if you want to do anything more complicated. So there are two levels of scripting. So let me see if I can jump over here since we're talking about this. That makes sense for a lot of what people are doing here. So in your shortcuts, and which is where you can see it, you have the ability to start and stop a script. So let me just open this up. So basically, when I start a script, it's going down and saying, what's the name of the script? And you can set up scripts. The other thing, though, that you have is there's other functions in scripting where you have things like start script dynamic. And what that will let you do is you can actually then inside of so if I'll just switch this over since we're kind of done here. If I set this to start script dynamic, I can then actually put little clips of code right in here and trigger that. So I don't have to go in and do detailed scripting. So there are things like set functions, the API.function inside of vMix where you can go in and basically do shortcuts. This now will let you do an aggregate of shortcuts. So you could go and say, do this, sleep for 30 seconds, do this, do this. And again, it's a simple way using sort of the API.functions to call the shortcuts, but in sort of an aggregate way with different types of pauses. You can go into very detailed scripting in here too, but if you're doing that, it probably makes sense to actually dive into the scripting side. And in scripting here, this is where you'll just go in and just stop this. You could go in and play with, the actual code. And, you can come in here and then run through and build more complex scripts that do have more logic and more decision tree type things in it. So that's probably a longer answer than you were looking for, but that's some of the stuff that you can definitely consider when you weigh it against using just shortcuts. So Battle for Freedom says, can the scripting pull UTC time to trigger video and audio play? So the quick answer is, I think you can. You can do pretty much, anything from the earliest versions of VB script, Visual Basic Script, you can do here. So you could actually go out to an external site and pull in information. The question is, how precise do you need this stuff to happen? So that would be part of this, because you're doing more of a poll. And so it isn't that the event is triggering on a time. What it would be much more structured like would be at some interval, I'm reading a time, and if the time is equal to or greater than something, then I'm taking a set of action. So it would probably be, in the real case here, a little different for this, where you're going to have some flex, some inaccuracy in the actual trigger time. So based on what you want it to do, yeah, this definitely could be it. So, if you wanted to make sure you started a pre-roll 10 minutes before a show and your show starts at 2, that sort of stuff is great. But if you needed to turn around and say, I need these 16 events to happen within 30 milliseconds of each other, probably not. That wouldn't necessarily be the type of thing where you could do that. So, because I know this is stuff that people would like to do if you're controlling external things, like controlling screens or an event production where you want to do things that may all be fired off at very specific times. It probably, unless you have some play in those trigger times, you'd probably want to look outside of this type of scripting to do that. So let's see. So Aziz, I didn't even think we set up Super Chat. So I just want to say we just Aziz just did a super chat for €5. Aziz, thank you. We don't do this for the economics of it, so I definitely appreciate that. That's that's something that everyone here is going to be really happy to see. So thank you very much for doing that, Aziz. Really appreciate that. So let's see. So JP says, are you writing all in Visual Studio Code? And how much code knowledge do you need to do this? So we do everything in Visual Studio Code that we create, and the real reason is it's a real editor. Some of the things let me just switch over to Visual Studio Code for a second, and just to take so you can sort of take a look here. You can see it's giving me when I do this, you actually are seeing things broken up. So I know as I look at things, these are the brackets that are matching, and these are the brackets that, so all this stuff. So if you're doing this inside of vMix and just in that little scripting, it's a really basic editor. So what we do is we do everything in Visual Studio, and then we copy and paste it into the vMix script and just do the testing there. So much easier to do. In terms of code and what you need to know, you do need to know coding. I mean, it's not totally without it. But my suggestion in almost all these cases is that start with someone else's code. So we post all this code up in a GitHub, so you have all that available to you. Take it and just start to modify it. So I think a lot of what people want to do is just tweak stuff that already exists, and that's a good way to start. So just go and take existing code, play with it, get to understand it, and we do this all the time here, and I will be honest with you, most programmers do this. They have like libraries of stuff that they just clip and put in because this is how I read my XML framework. This is how I do it. And they'll just use this over and modify it case by case. So definitely something to look at as a way to get started with these types of scripting, automations. But the other piece is, Google is your friend. If you type Visual Basic, how do I, you'll get tons of code samples. You'll get stuff from Microsoft with detailed documentation. So some of it is understanding the broad concept like XML. How does XML work? And then as you start to look at the code side, you say, well, what are the functions that I can do to XML? What are the things I want to do? And you'll start to tunnel through that. So you don't have to come in this from sort of a formal coding background. But I think if you look at other people's code, look at what it does, modify it, and then start to use that as the baseline, you'll be in good shape to get to that next level with coding. So let's see. Battle for Freedom. So Battle for Freedom saying, so cool. I need to account for delays. Yeah, I mean, that's basically because it's not, getting back to the thing with triggering things on a UTC timecode. Because the time isn't triggering the event, you are having an ongoing event that's checking the time and then seeing if it has to do something. If it's past a certain time, it has to do something. So yeah, there would be that delay level in there. So Aziz is asking, is there a way to use more than 8 vMix callers with scripting? I heard there is a way without closing vMix. So Aziz, as far as I know, a given instance of vMix can work with up to 8 callers. And that the whole framework for that is there. So scripting isn't going to sort of change that. However, if you have multiple instances of vMix running, and those are multiple distinct licenses for vMix, you could, say, have 8 on one and 8 on another, and output those into the first one and do all your mixing on one. So there would be ways to get past that. limitation, but you still, I think, on a single instance of a licensed copy of vMix, you can just do up to 8. I think, it's on the HD, it's 4, I think, and on the Pro, it's 8. So that would give you that way to do that. I don't believe, and there could be something out there that's going around, but I don't believe there's a way to do more than 8 on a single licensed instance of vMix. So, so let's see. So Battle for Freedom says, my broadcast starts at 7:03:25, and I want to ensure that it starts. So yes. So if you wanted to do something, if you're doing stuff, 03:25 means you're sort of in the second space. So this could be something that you could put in the background, waiting for a certain time, and it could just be running aggressively because you're not actually switching a show. So to get started, you could turn around and say, I'm going to have this go, so every 100 milliseconds, I'll never be more than 1/10 of a second off. And as soon as I see I hit my time, then I could take action and get started. You have to have everything ready there, though. So when the show starts through automation, it's starting the same, and those cameras are going to come on. So you got to make sure everything's good. But yeah, this is definitely something that you could do. And the thing is, with that type of script, it can run, and then once the show started, it can exit itself. So it's not using any cycles in the background. So that's really a script that's waiting for an event to happen, triggering something and going away. So very cool way to do that. And again, because it's not part of a production, you can be more aggressive timing-wise to keep running that. So, he says, glad Battle for Freedom saying he's glad he has 32 years of programming because learning Lua for Fusion Studio has been fun. Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I know we're planning on doing more outside of the actual Visual Basic, and specifically in Node.js, which we think is a good fit for a lot of people for doing automation. You can do all these things that we're showing outside of scripting, vMix's own scripting, the Visual Basic. So you can do things in Node.js that read all the vMix components and talk to everything. So you have a lot of capabilities out, through alternate scripting languages as well. So yeah, the Fusion Studio, that's, yeah, fun is a good word. We'll leave it at that. So let's see. So JP, he's saying he may be slamming his head against the wall with C++ and SQL. Yeah, I think, JP, if you're thinking of things that you can do around, getting into coding. Visual Basic is good, but Node.js is also very good. There are some great tutorials on YouTube around Node.js. I could probably send you some links if you'd like, that will get you started. And I think it's something that is much more accessible to people that aren't formally trained programmers. C++ is not trivial. We actually don't, we prefer to use C#, which is closer to, an object, an abstracted object-oriented language. C++ is object-oriented, but there's a lot of stuff you have to do. And you have to do like all your memory collections and everything else. And when you get to complex logic, you can forget to delete memory that you're using and cause all sorts of issues and run out of memory pretty quickly. That's what's typically called a memory leak. So these types of things, but things like C#, are a lot more user-friendly, programmer-friendly. But things like Node.js, I think, are much more accessible. And it's a script thing, so you can iterate and learn from that. So let's see. Oh, okay. So Aziz, I am sorry if I misunderstood. So yes. So if you have 8 people and you want to bring in another 8, so yes, I believe you can actually go in and through scripting, change, who's assigned into what connections. And I believe the invites, because you send out a unique invite to each guest, when you finish like one event session, so you had a panel and you're getting ready for the next panel, you could change the inputs to inputs related to the invites that you sent for panel 2, and then the invites you sent for panel 3. I haven't actually done that, but it's definitely, I think it's something that's definitely doable. So I'll take a look at that and get back to you on that. But yes, that's basically, you're just changing what the inputs are. And so you can have these types of things where you can really control a lot of what's going on at that low level in the production. So thank you for that. That's a really good point. I'm sorry I don't know the detail off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that is a something you can do. So let's see. So Battle for Freedom is saying brilliant. They say he switched to C# from VB because it forced me to write code better. Yeah. So yes, I agree with that. That is something that I think the more structured these languages become, it forces you to be more disciplined about the code. And if you think about this, and now, when you depend on this for production things, think of it the same way as if you took all your cables and you just threw them in one big box and you carried that around, and when you had to set up again, you pulled out. If you had no organization and no structure behind this, you're giving yourself a lot of work time and time again. So the advantage to using things like Visual Studio Code and saving scripts outside of a vMix session, now those things become reusable. And I can sort of sit back and say, okay, I know I did something with this, so let me pull that script out, and I'm going to modify it, or I'm going to just take parts of it out. But it's all organized and well structured. It's well documented. That's another big thing, because believe me, things which seem so apparent to you in the moment, given a month, and you look back at the code, you're going like, no clue what I was doing there. So having that sort of documentation is great. But also, once you start building this thing as more structured code, your ability to be responsive and to change things and to reuse and support them as vMix changes or other things will all be there. And that's going to save you time, going to save you money, because those two are the same. And I think I agree with you. Battle for Freedom. That's getting into the practice of good coding, executing good coding best practices and things is critical if this is going to become a key piece of your value proposition in production. All right. So, okay, I don't think we have any other questions here. So, if that's it, I want to thank everybody for joining us here. I again want to give a special shout out to Aziz for his super chat. That's something we weren't expecting, but we're definitely grateful for that. So Aziz, thank you very much for that. So I guess we're gonna wrap this up for today, and we will see everybody same time next week. Take care and thank you. Bye.